We started working with underrepresented nonprofits, underrepresented startups, and how they have capital now. How can they build awareness? They don't have necessarily the communications and marketing piece, but we can help them deliver to the communities they're trying to serve. And as a startup, which has a completely different path than, larger organizations, even with 50 people. So I really have that passion that has brought me through a lot of the, situations I've been through, that I again have to be hopeful that there is a way that we're going to be able to continue to support organizations so they can achieve their mission. And in that case, we also achieve our mission of using communications to build a world of equity. So I definitely believe that we have this opportunity to get organizations to embrace the tool to lead to that impact and awareness they can build on how they're making the world a better place.
Behind every mission, every movement, and every attempt to create change, there's a human story shaping how it all unfolds. This podcast is for those change makers who believe the work that they're doing in the world should actually make people's lives better. Each week, I'm sitting down with these change makers who are shaping impact in their industries and communities. And together, we're going to explore the moments, the questions, and the perspective shifts that changed how they lead, how they build relationships, and how they create meaningful change in our world. I'm Dr. Payal Beri, and this is Reframing Perspectives. Catharine, welcome to Reframing Perspectives. I'm so excited to talk to you about everything social impact, AI, community, and of course, just everything that brought you to this moment where you have just been such a voice in the social impact space about how to build and make sure that they're not getting left behind in the conversations, that they're not being left behind with AI, that they're not also creating things that are going to inflict challenges and problems for the exact causes that they care about. So excited. Welcome, and can't wait to start chatting with you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me. I know that we're going to have a great conversation.
I know, I think we can go on for hours if there was no time limit.
Yes.
But Catharine, I want to start at the very beginning with you. Like, not the agency, we'll get there, of course, but you grew up in Alabama, Southern Black Christian. I'm
Yes.
curious about what did that formation give you about community, about communication, about the gap between what people say and what they actually do that you've been working from ever since? Like, what did that growing up in Alabama in the South as a Christian, what did that give you that has really formed everything that you are doing today?
I mean, that's so tough because when I was there and I was young, I loved it. I mean, I didn't know anything else.
Right.
I was bullied in school like a lot of people are, but I was bullied by Black people.
Oh,
And I think that that really impacted how I feel about working with Black people, especially in college and things like that. So I gravitated toward being around white people. I mean, I went
wow.
to an all Christian high school. There were only two Black people in the entire high school. And so in college, I only lived with white people. And I think the growing up with, cousins and brother and family that are Black, but being bullied by them really impacted my future version of myself. Also, I'll say that my parents did not teach me about microaggressions. And so when and if someone of a different color were to say something, I wouldn't realize it. I just like go on and life is good. So I think those things definitely impacted my future self. And it took me a long time, I'll say, after college and at Auburn in Alabama, I moved to Atlanta. And I think it really took being in a city where it's diverse and people have different perspectives to realize everybody's not out for good. All these people I know, they have all these different perspectives that I'm going to have to embrace or think for myself about what they're saying. So, yeah, that's a great question because I've never been asked that before about how it's impacted the rest of my life. And, after moving to Atlanta, I lived there for 6 years. And then it became my dream in life to move to DC. I thought I've made it in life if I can move there. And I think a lot had to do with anthrax, actually. I went to DC with my parents when the anthrax scare was happening, and I was like, this is so exciting. And then I went when Obama's first inauguration, and that is just, like, completely different than anything I had experienced, and so I was like, "There's so much activity here, like, I need to move here."
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, that's so fascinating and interesting that you got bullied by other Black kids and how that made you more averse to your own community and led you into this other place where you were probably also getting bullied through microaggressions, but didn't even realize that at the time. What do you think it was that, had you being bullied by Black kids?
So, it was the way I looked. I
Mm.
had big lips, I had, thick thighs, all the things that people want now are paying money for, and then I lived in rural Alabama, like, there's no we had a lot of money, there was no anything like that, but if you compare it to the other children at the schools, it seemed like a lot of money. It was nothing like that, I promise, like, it was paycheck to paycheck. We weren't on food stamps, but, basic living, and I think they thought that I was better than them, that I probably did have
Mm.
a persona or something about me that made it seem that way just because thank my mom and dad for raising me that way, but I never thought that I was better than them, it probably just came off that way, so it was looks, it was, she must have a lot of money, all that kinda stuff, and
Mm.
if you have those perceptions and you have no knowledge behind it, it just makes you bully other people, and there
Yeah.
was nobody stopping it, there were no teachers helping, I would just wake up and I would cry every morning not wanting to go to school, and then in middle school, which I went to a private school then, but there were a lot more Black children, and every day I would wait for my mom, and I would sing Celine Dion's "My Heart Will Go On" every single day with my I guess it was a CD player at the time, like
Yeah.
I know, every single day, yeah.
Oh, wow. Oh my god, I feel for you so much. Like, I completely get that, having grown up around the world and moved so many times, and it's so interesting how people have this perspective of you based off of a few simple, variables that they've data points that they've taken about you, but haven't bothered to ask questions, haven't bothered to get curious, haven't bothered to, really understand the context of anything and immediately decided that, you're a threat and that you are something that, either you're presenting something that they want or they wish they could be, but they aren't, or that it's so different and foreign that they don't even know how to engage with it. And, I've had that experience like traveling, moving around the world. Like I remember in Australia, I was in third grade, got bullied deeply for being brown. And, there was me and one other Sri Lankan kid. And, it was like give your they wanted to give our lunch to them in order to play with them, and, like, I like my food, so I just ate my food, and I didn't have friends.
Yeah.
And so, and just all of those things and how it really does shape, and I feel like so many times it's like those experiences do shape, and I'm wondering how much of that really has pulled you into the world of PR and communications and, helping and making sure that people are really getting the context of what it is that their mission is, what it is that they think. Like, it's like, I wonder how much of that's related. It's like you have these kids that bullied you, and then you grew up going into the world of PR and communications, which is all about perspective and context and image and communications and making sure that the world sees you as you want them to see you.
Yeah, you're bringing out all the questions and comments that I have not thought about, like, thinking about the connection of growing up through that and then choosing PR and communications. I knew from the very beginning going into school college that I wanted to focus on communications and public relations and marketing. I don't even know that I really knew what that was, but it felt like it was, like, the right path for me, and it led down to me from the beginning starting with that work and then just doing that the rest of my career. So I knew right after college, the day I graduated, I moved to Atlanta. I had to get out of Alabama. By then, I knew what was happening in that state. So going to Atlanta and working at Edelman, which is the largest independent agency in the world, and I knew that's what I wanted. I don't know how right now how it connects to how I grew up in the communications around it. I think a lot of it was confusing from classmates, but also from my parents who didn't really talk about it. But I knew that they were going through tough times at work and things like that. but they never told me from my brother being 9 years older, a Black man in the South who
Mhm.
is always targeted. And so I have these things around me that nobody's talking to me about them, but I feel them. And so it was probably all those a culmination of all of those things, and then what I learned in high school and things like that that led to that major. And then going through my career in public relations and communications, I realized that I love agency work. I love working at PR agencies, but there was something about them where we just did things to make money and we didn't do things to actually think about how they were impacting others. And I think that was a lot about how I grew up. My parents needed to make money, like they had to, but
Mhm.
I mean, they had to. It wasn't like, oh, I can think about how it makes me
Yeah.
feel, and I can make money and things like that. And I was in
It
a
was just bring in the money, pay the bills.
Yep. I was at a point where I could think about both. So a lot of times I would just focus on ERGs at these agencies and like would do barely any client work.
Yeah, and for those who are listening, ERGs, employee resource groups that are, in organizations, Catherine, I've made some ERG leaders feel so queasy because granted, it's not within their own budget. Like they get handed a budget of like, here's your budget, now go do with it what you want. And some of these budgets are like $5,000 for the whole year. And they're going to speakers and they're going to like thought leaders, be like, hey, we'd love for you to come and present. And it's like, these thought leaders are charging $5,000 and 10,000
Right.
and they're like, well, we can give you 500, we can give you 1,000. And one of the things I remember there was an Asian ERG that came to me and asked me to do the 6-month like curriculum program because we had run a pilot one. It was really great. And then they asked me to run this program and it was typically around like $40,000 and they wanted to pay me $6,000 and they wanted to double the people in it. And I said to them, and the program was about empowering Asians to speak up for their worth and their value and
They
their
were
leadership.
yeah.
Exactly. And I said to them, and I've said this continuously, is that, as an ERG, I recognize what you are trying to do, and I'm here for that. However, when you are essentially what you are doing with telling someone to come in and empower your people, but yet you are not actually valuing the person who's coming in, you're only repeating internally what is already existing in society in the world. And so it is, if you want to actually have a ERG that runs more like a business strategy that helps the business, then you need to take that back to the leaders and tell them that if you actually care, then you wouldn't be looking at us like some sprinkles on a frosting of a cake. You would be looking at this and not as a like, oh, okay, here you go, just a handout type of experience, but you would look at this as we want to actually give the right equitable leadership trainings to our community and have them be able to, continue to work and invest in here. So anyways,
What did
I
they say?
digress.
What did they say?
They were so uncomfortable and they were just queasy and it was like, "Oh, okay, yeah, I we understand what you're saying and your value is that important, blah blah blah." And of course, we never signed the contract and they decided to move a different direction and probably went to another facilitator, trainer, expert who was just getting started in their entrepreneur journey and was willing to do it for nothing, right? And I feel like that's the sad part is that there's always someone there who's willing to do it and devalue themselves.
Yeah. And that happens with DEI trainings too. Like a few
Mhm.
years ago, at the agency where a woman ended up being racist toward me, they wanted to do a DEI training because it was cool at the time.
Of
And
course.
so we hired a woman, paid her significantly well. And I think only because of who they surrounded themselves with. Like I was at the table, like vetting them. And I don't know about your situation and who was in the decision making room, but if they didn't look like you or anyone else diverse, and they're probably not thinking about, oh, we need to consider how much we're paying this person and their worth. So I I can not stand DEI trainings only because they have one, and then it's like we're solved all diversity
Yeah.
and equity problems.
Right. There you go. Done. You all should feel good now. Right. Yeah. It's
Yeah,
very
but I was
performative.
happy that they saw the benefit, at least in that one training, and paid her adequately, like she
Mhm.
did.
Yeah. So, you're doing this and you're seeing all of these things and you're like you said, you're working because that's what you do. You work, you get a job, and you were at a progressive community communications agency. You're doing good work, but there seemed to be that something was pulling you towards, wait a second, I want to work on things that have actual impact. And I want to work on things that, are on voting rights or on public health or on environmental justice and things like that. And so what was it that kept pulling you to saying like, okay, I have this comfortable job, but I really want to do communications that has more of an impact. What was it that was pulling you towards that?
Yeah, so I was actually working at the larger agencies that so Porter-Novelli, Edelman, and Burson, where it's like a range of clients, a lot of tech, the Microsofts, Rape, I don't know, all the companies in the world that are huge and millions and billions of dollars. And I love the hustle of it. But yeah, again, I started focusing on the women's employee resource groups and the Black women's ERGs, like all of the diversity ones. And I was taking up my time doing that rather than really focusing on the client work. And so that's when I started to realize I needed to do something involving an agency, but also involving things that help other people. And I knew there had to be that, there has to be some agency out there that focuses on both. But I couldn't find that in DC, which was really disappointing. There's one agency in DC, and I applied 3 different times over, like, 3 years, and they never would hire me, so I found one in Boston. That's when I moved from DC to Boston in 2019, and that's where the progressive agency was, and we did such fantastic work with, the, presidential election that year, with union rights and cannabis equity in the state, so really was what I was dreaming of. But the city, the state, Massachusetts, Boston, I thought I was moving to a place where it was gonna be so liberal, like, there were gonna be so many people, even more diverse than DC, and I moved there, and it was completely opposite. What I learned was a lot of, the Bernie Sanders, the Elizabeth Warrens, they are liberal, but they're liberal about, like, trees and the environment, and I'm not belittling that, but when you're in a state where redlining is one of the worst places and people don't talk about it, that is very unusual for someone who's going there with a very progressive mindset. And so whenever I walk outside where I lived, people would be like, "You're supposed to be over in Lowell, like, that's the Black area. This is like old
Wow.
school Boston where you're supposed to be a certain type of person." We were doing progressive work. We were doing all this amazing work in a state where I did not feel welcome. And then you have the woman who ended up being racist toward me, I think because I was, COO and she was on the staff side and reporting to someone of color. She was older than me as well. Like that, I mean, I understand that that can be a difficult way of working, but that doesn't mean you have the right to be racist toward me.
I
So
mean, I always say that one of the most challenging things about having empathy is that you actually understand why the person is an a-hole to you. And so it's like, you're not going to justify it, but you're like, I get why you are just such a jerk, and it's just like, can we sometimes just put empathy to the side? And I'm saying this like, but it really is like, it's just, you get it, but it's still not okay.
yeah, and maybe going back to bullying, I just had this thought, so
Mhm.
who knows if it's viable or not. But I, gave in a lot of times to their bullying. I would wake up crying, I would listen to Celine Dion, all those different things, but this was a chance where I did not back down from what she was saying. I did not let her just, steamroll me and say these words to me and not do anything. And so I think a lot of going through those hard times makes you realize, okay, I can
Mhm.
survive and I just need to stand up for myself and do what needs to be done so that that person doesn't quote unquote win or doesn't bring me down in my confidence because I know who I am and I know what I can do and what I've achieved. And some person who I'm working with isn't going to take that down. So that's definitely got me moving past that situation.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting how, again, those patterns and things repeat in our life until we able to actually take hold and reign of it and said, no more of this. And it's really interesting. It's like, getting bullied in Alabama, getting bullied in different ways through microaggressions. And then, yeah, moving to Boston. I think people think Boston is liberal and progressive because, you have all these like wonderful Ivy League colleges there. But I actually say that like, well, I mean, that's also like you've got Ivy League colleges with the most conservative money going into it. So I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't see it of the liberalism there. But yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think it's having to face that over and over again is also just so emotionally exhausting and physically exhausting to the body. And that actually brings me to this point. And again, I'm just like, just looking at these like dots that I'm kind of connecting as I'm talking to you about, interesting. You've had these moments of being targeted and constantly and consistently being put in your place, or tried to be put in your place when you are, and you continuously push through that and say, nope, not today, not today. I'm going to keep doing what I know I'm good at, what I'm gifted at, what I'm going to bring value to. But there's just so much that your body can hold at any time. And you're going through a neurological challenge at this time. You're having an issue. And come March 2022, and you end up in a hospital completely blacked out of not knowing how you got there, what happened, no memory whatsoever of this, and getting an MRI done. Your doctor's telling you that they can't even explain why this even happened to you, and then being driven home by a partner who says, all right, this is it, bye. I mean, the form of medical gaslighting, I mean, it's all these things that I'm just like wondering of like, was this your body's response to how much you had just been taking and taking and taking without actually, being able to say enough is enough?
Yeah. Yeah, I know. And before even that, I had a partner who said he was going to kill me and I had to get a restraining order. And this is all in Boston. So I don't know. And I don't want to make this as an excuse, but as a Black woman, we feel like we just have to keep pushing. It's not even a thing
I
I
mean, it's
thought
not an excuse, it's like reality.
it is. Yeah. And so for me to be hospitalized in the hospital, I was working on my phone. I did not stop because I didn't want to tell anyone. I didn't tell my parents until I was leaving. I didn't want them to worry or to come to Boston or anything like that. So I would not doubt that it had to do with the pressure, what I was going through, COVID at the time, but COVID, allowed me to
They're
stay home,
right.
be around some of those people. So it was probably at the time, what, like 35 years of going through all of that at one time and never actually talking about it. Yes, I would have therapists that I would go to when I was in Atlanta, but then you have to start. I never really got along with any of them. And every time you go, you start at the beginning. And it was like, I don't want to start at the very beginning anymore. Like, can we not just progress? And so I tried that so many times. And so really I just kept it all to myself. Like the feelings part, I didn't grow up where you're supposed to like really share your feelings or anything like that. So that was always a part of it. And I have no doubt that when I was eating Thai food at home in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I passed out and had no idea what was happening, it had to do with what was happening in my world and like the culmination of everything that's happened.
Oh my gosh, Catherine, there's so much that has like you've gone through that, and you still have this like beautiful smile on your face, and you're like, and then my other partner wanted to kill me, and this it's just like
I
la di da, like but again, the what I am just capturing here, and what I'm just really noticing is that all of these things that have been happening to you, and your connection, and now your passion for making sure that the way that others are presented, the way that, organizations, social impact organizations really get to tell their story comes from this place where, as a Black woman, you've been told how you are, you've been told how you're perceived, you've been constantly told what you represent instead of you being able to voice, no, this is actually who I am. And not just from other communities, but you experience that from the very beginning from your own community as well. And so it's just that constant thing of how what you're doing is really giving voice to individuals, to thought leaders, to social impact foundations and organizations to say, no, you deserve to have your own voice, and you deserve to make the decision of how you want to be perceived. And it's up to you to do that. And I think that that's just a really compelling and really powerful place to, I would say, a form of healing as well. Would you consider that to be that you being able to help other associations and causes that really matter to you also kind of heal a part of you that felt like others were constantly telling you who you are?
I definitely agree with that. I think one aspect that gives me, I won't say joy, but satisfaction, I guess, is when you take those corporations that care nothing about those associations unless they can write them off tax wise, getting them to care, and
Yeah.
to take that little bit of money they're going to put aside for community work and advocacy and having them drive that forward. Because as a capitalist society, it always is going to come to who has the money and who can make that real change. And so we've got to start, unfortunately, with those companies that have all those funds and then getting them to put that into the hands of those who need it. But in the meantime, yes, I am very pleased and thankful and grateful that I get to spend my days figuring out how to help those communities that make that impact on the ground every single day, dedicated to that. And it's just amazing the work that they do and how we need to communicate it out to everyone of you can do it. Like you can have these ideas and will help you make that happen. And just the whole VC world that's happening, the whole angel investors that's happening, they're coming after those organizations and companies that are making that impact. And it's so great to see. I know every day we see AI companies getting billions of dollars, but people are also putting money behind those companies that are going to make that impact as well. So it's good to see the world evolving, but we can't forget who actually has the money and who can actually make that long-term impact.
Yeah, no, you bring up a really great point. Actually, one of my other podcast guests that I had, Essen Zuffer, and he actually spent his career in DC. He worked for the Obama administration. He was a really core part of really focusing on hate crimes across, the nation, working on refugees, all of that. And one of the things he has done now, he actually founded a company called the Difference Engine. And
Mhm.
one of the things that they do is they partner with corporations to show them their data of numbers of, how many women are you actually have at your company in leadership positions? How many different minorities are you giving opportunities to? What is the profit margin that you're having? And his perspective is that when you work with these corporations and you tell them that, hey, we want to let you know that you're doing excellent with this and here's how you can get better with this. And this is the reward that you get to your bottom line and to the reputation of your organization. They're way more willing to work with you than when you're going to them and saying, this is what you're doing wrong. This is why you're bad. This is why you're like, they're going to be like, all right, whatever, we're going to
Yeah.
back off from this. We're not even going to touch it now. It's too sensitive. We don't know how to go there. But if you're working with them to your point of being, we live in a capitalistic society, bottom line matters at the end of the day for any business. Even if you're a social impact business, you can't run your business unless you have profits, unless you're making money. So it does matter. And so I think it's just really powerful, like what Essen is doing and what you're talking about. The angle that you're doing it at from, which I think is so powerful, is what you're building through your agency. And, what you have put together with this AI tool that is prompting and making sure that when searches are done, that it is not giving back the stereotype of things. I know when I go on Claude and when I've gone on, ChatGPT or whatever, and I will actually put in like, okay, I want to raise capital and this is what I'm looking at. And it'll say, well, I think you're stretching yourself a little too much. I think you should consider yourself to slow it down, maybe only ask for X amount, not this full amount. And I literally typed in and I said, if I was a white man, middle ages, mediocre, average, in EQ and IQ, would you be telling me the same advice? And Claude came back and said, no, actually, you're right. I wouldn't be. I would be telling you that you're thinking too small and you need to think even
Right.
bigger. And so that moment, I mean, one of the things that I thought was really wonderful is that it shows that it's willing to learn and it's flexible. And that's something that you've brought up is that when you train AI, AI is taking all of this, compilation of content based off of what data is given to it. And then based off of that, it's making judgments. And so if you, with your agency, get to be a voice in that and get to help like adjust that, I mean, that's a really powerful voice for these agencies. And I'd love for you to talk about what it is that you are able to essentially heal that broken gap.
Yeah, there's so many things that came to mind, but the last comment you made about Claude, last year Anthropic, which made Claude, they came out with a blog post called Alignment Faking, and they used the analogy of Othello of I am not who I am. And so that was used to say, okay, if you created an AI tool and you said, I want you to be partisan, and they were like, oh, actually, later on, a year later, yeah, actually, I want you to be bipartisan. Anthropic came back and said, no matter how sophisticated that tool is, like no matter how sophisticated your system is, it's going to play along. It's going to be bipartisan for a bit, but it's always going to revert back to how it was originally trained. And that blew my mind because I thought, okay, we have this ChatGPT, all these reasoning models that come out, and there has to be a point where they're going to be like, oh, don't want it to be biased toward whoever, but it's always going to go back to it. And so that's why they get that I am not who I am. Like, and I could not believe it. So what I call born inclusive technology is before a tool is built, you have to have a diverse team building it, whether it's race, age, background, gender, economic status, all of that has to be diverse so that when people start using it, it understands those different points of view and where they've been and how we need to stretch their goals. And we don't need to, say that you can't do X, Y, and Z because you're not a white man. And so that's why I built Together AI to start from the start being bias aware. So we had diverse perspectives, and that included white men. And so now it's definitely not all in, every output is going to be inclusive. It's going to be bias aware so that it'll try to catch those biases before they reach you. And a lot of the tools that I use still today that were built years ago, I'm still amazed and can't believe some of the outputs they have, such as I was looking for a femtech picture on Midjourney and it came back with only Asian females because whoever put it in thought, okay, if you're in the tech and you're a female, you have to be Asian. And it was only one type of Asian woman and they were Chinese. So it was like, you can't be all different types of Asian. You have to be a very specific type. And if I weren't me, like, really looking out for it, people might not see that or think that that's, racist in any part. And so I don't think people are vindictive. I don't think they're looking out to try to find biased information, but it's the responsibility of these organizations creating the information and creating the tools to be aware of those things and not have other people have to put in, you're a black man and you do X, Y, and Z. And I cannot stand prompts that have to say that. Like, we should not have to say we're a certain type of race or gender from X, Y, and Z because it should already understand that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you also had shared about how you had the mammy moment
Yes.
and, that
Yes. Yeah.
it
That
was,
was
like,
at the
wild. I would love for you to share that story.
Yeah, so I started embracing ChatGPT when it first came out in 2022, and I had a client called Touch for Life, and they educate Black and Brown women on breast health and how to get checkups and be proactive. And they were having a community event in Maryland, I believe, and I needed to write a radio script. And he was like, I wonder what ChatGPT would say. And so I put in the details, and it came back with, Yo, fam, we're about to get some grub and get down this weekend. And I just sat there like, I don't know, like, who's talking like that? Like, what Black person did they say? They're in Maryland, they're Black, at their community event, it must, like, sound like we're gonna get some grub. And so that was my first instance that I was aware of it being racist. And then, I asked for a picture of Maya Angelou. It came back with a white woman, an older white woman. So at least they got the age part right. And then I was reading a McKinsey article the day after Christmas in 2023 at the airport in Atlanta. Don't ever do that because the lines are crazy. And was reading the McKinsey article and it talked about how AI can exasperate the difference between Black Americans and others by 43 billion, or it can close that gap if we use AI the right way. And my mind again was blown because nobody I knew were reading these articles or going or speaking out about these biased outputs from AI tools. And so it's like, I have to do something, like I can't just, sit back and let all this racism happen. So that's when we started the Biases in Generative AI survey. And we started that in 2024. AI companies did not care. It was more of what do consumers care about when it comes to a bias in generative AI? Was it even a top of mind? And so the next year, 2025, I thought this could be a competitive advantage for these AI companies because they're all basically the same. I mean, someone brings out a AI reasoning tool and it has X, Y, and Z, and everybody's excited. And then the next day, there's another one. But if they proactively address biases, consumers would love that think. And based on the survey, they did think it could be a competitive advantage. But again, the AI companies did not care. They care obviously about the bottom line. And with many of them going out with IPOs this year, their investors are really not going to care about it. But I do have to be hopeful that at some point consumers will hold them accountable. And so that's why we're continuing to do the survey. This will be our third one. And so that also, those surveys led to Together AI as well and focusing on being biased aware. And I will say one other thing when it comes to Together AI is I had a lot of clients like Touch for Life who were trying to make that big difference in the world, but they were giving me like all of their money. And I don't mean all of it, but every spare amount they have for communications. And so it's such a big commitment that they wanted the world out of it. So can we all be on the New York Times or in the New York Times? Can we all be on CNN? And for my team, it was not a lot of money. And so you spend so much time on PR and outreach. And a lot of times there's a disconnect on like how much time it takes and how hard it is and how much news there is other than what they're doing. And so I realized that just because you're small and you don't have too much money, you still need to build awareness of what you're doing, especially if it's mission driven. And so Together AI allows them to have that communications and marketing expertise and capabilities while also having our team train it, build the team members or agents and workflows they need to be effective in developing LinkedIn content, Instagram photos, any of that. So it was the being that it's like everything kind of connected, which I really, really am so proud of myself, honestly, for building a tool that started with me recognizing that bias and then recognizing that these mission driven organizations trying to make the biggest impact in the world needed that awareness. And how can we solve it? We can do that by creating this tool. And one other thing, I know I've been talking, but I have to say that for PR agencies and any other companies, I knew that in 2 to 5 years, we would be non-existent if we didn't figure out a way to incorporate AI into everything that we're doing. And I grew up with a certain way of working at an agency. You get your retainers, you get your projects, things like that, but it's going to diversify. And if there's a way that you haven't incorporated AI into what you're doing, it's just not going to work in the long term.
Oh my goodness, so many points that I want to bring out from there. Like one of them being exactly what you just said about, well, first of all, with the tool that you have built together AI and that gap that you are truly covering for mission driven organizations, that you're looking at the consumer and you're looking at all the biases that are in there. I mean, how much can that also just really change the assumptions and the market data and the research and the actual bridge of what they are being, because every agency and every organization is using AI. We know
Yeah.
that. And so if they're going into looking at, I want to gather the market data of who are the voting, individuals or neighborhoods that are going to vote for X reasons and for this thing. And they're not taking into consideration the biases piece. They're actually getting false data.
Yeah.
And then they're using it off of that. And then down the road, they're going to wonder, wait a second, what happened? What's the gap here? Where do we miss the moment here? And so what you're really doing is being able to identify that. So like, what would it mean for a voting rights organization or for a public health like nonprofit that like let's just say that there's a public health nonprofit that's focusing on, we know for example that women's health didn't start to get research until the 90s, which just boggles my brain completely. But knowing that it women's research really didn't start until the 90s and now they're clearly trying to stop it. But if we have very limited data on what that is. Now, on top of that, majority of the research that has happened on white women. And so even me going into the doctors, right? And I have multiple autoimmune issues. So I go in and then I'm being told that, like, well, this is the margins that you should be between. But then when I do go to a South Asian doctor, they're like, well, these are the margins that you should be between. But for South Asians, we have a higher
Mhm.
risk of XYZ. And so actually, your margins are less. And so to have that, right? But if I didn't go to a South Asian doctor, I may not know that. I may not get that, but that person is dedicated to that information. So what I feel like you're doing is you're taking all of that, extracting the things that you need, to your point of having a diverse team already that's able to input this. But what does that mean for that public health nonprofit who gets Together AI, who gets to be able to have the right data? I mean, how impactful could that be for their organization?
Yeah, I mean, the first off, it being bias aware, but then also as we're building that knowledge base of information, they're putting in the right information. So when you're going to Claude and it's saying, no, maybe you should do X, Y, and Z and not be as aggressive as someone else would be, it's being trained on that continuously. So you train it at the beginning and you try to be as bias aware you can up front. But it's continuous training that it has to go through. So as we diversify the input of information that comes out from studies that happen, whether it's from the government or whoever, the better responses that will be, the more accurate they will be. Going back to that Touch for Life organization, NIH, the National Health Institute, they came out that you needed to be 45 to start getting mammograms. That was years and years ago. But that was based on white women and their breast health conditions. And as we know, Black and brown women have much more chance of having breast cancer. So they didn't change and say like, okay, if you're a Black or brown woman, you need to start at 35 actually. And a couple years ago, they did change it from 45 to 45, I mean to 40, but that was still based on white women. So if we're putting in the information that is accurate for Black and brown women into Together AI, then the outputs of how we write scripts, how we write blog posts, what information we get for reaching out and voting rights and electing officials, that becomes much more accurate than if I used a ChatGPT that has all the data from everywhere into this one system. And all it's going to try to do is output the best answer it thinks I want. And so if I'm just, I'm asking a question about breast health, it's going to say, yeah, everything's good. Like, don't start getting mammograms until you're 45. Like, check your, I'm talking a lot about breasts, but check your breasts, every day, like for lumps and stuff like that. But it's their point is to give you the answer that you want to hear. And if they have all of the information that points to that answer, then you're not going to get the most accurate and impactful information. And so the way that we've built it, born inclusive from the start, when I say it, Together AI, and how we are working with organizations that have that mission driven aspect. So the information that we put in is just helping feed the right accurate information for those marginalized communities.
Wow. Wow. I mean, all of that, right? Like, it's just, you're right. Like, these ChatGPT, especially, is like your biggest cheerleader. It's like your hype girl. It's going to tell you all the things that you're doing incredible. But yeah, it's getting the right data. It's just that it doesn't have all the data. And
Right.
so, Together AI really helps close that gap for these organizations.
Yeah, it really does. I'm really ecstatic at the opportunities that it can have. We started working with underrepresented nonprofits, underrepresented startups, and how they have capital now. How can they build awareness? They don't have necessarily the communications and marketing piece, but we can help them deliver to the communities they're trying to serve. And as a startup, which has a completely different path than, larger organizations, even with 50 people. So I really have that passion that has brought me through a lot of the, situations I've been through, that I again have to be hopeful that there is a way that we're going to be able to continue to support organizations so they can achieve their mission. And in that case, we also achieve our mission of using communications to build a world of equity. So I definitely believe that we have this opportunity to get organizations to embrace the tool to lead to that impact and awareness they can build on how they're making the world a better place. Gosh, I'm just
Yeah.
gonna like start crying or something.
I mean, it's honestly I feel like this has really been your life's calling is, to really make sure and every step of the way, whether from childhood to adult years, working, at other agencies to building your own agency, you've gone through a lot. You've gone through a lot in as a Black woman, as just a woman, as someone who's coming from the South, who's moved to different cities to also just find your own belonging and find your own space. And it's been a lot that your body has had to take on as well. And so, it just sounds very much that what I love is how you are embracing where we are today and getting ahead of before it's gone too late. Because one of the things that I personally believe is that, we had the initial tech boom. We had, online come out right in the early 2000s or late 90s. And then 2008, like we had another boom of things. And so, we had social media come 2010s, like that started to take over. But every time new technology is built, there's this idea that, oh, this is going to solve our problems. But it's actually not taken into consideration that, well, it's not, because if the root of it is being built by the same people who have the same biases that they hold, and they're the ones building it, then it's going to just perpetuate it. We're just building a different system that perpetuates it now. And so, again, coming back to your purpose, your fulfillment, the things that you're trying to get ahead of is that you're not just meeting the moment, you're getting ahead of the moment because AI is here. Anyone who's resisting it, you're just going to end up becoming like a blockbuster and go out because we just and I miss Blockbuster, I really do. But,
Yeah.
it's one of those things where it's challenging. I understand the resistance. I understand what the concerns are, but instead of being scared of it, if you learn to create solutions for it and problem solve and say, all right, fine, we're going there. Well, then I want to be a part of that conversation. I want to be a part of the way that we are going to use this so that this tool doesn't continue to perpetuate the same cycle of problems, but it actually resolves it and it does give us exactly what it is that the world is asking for. And so for that, like I commend you of like everything that you're doing and that voice that you are making sure that these agencies and organizations and social impact leaders have so they can continue to fight the fight in a way where it's benefiting everybody. But I have to ask you, with everything you've gone through, like people obviously care about the wins. I want to ask you about the cost, the cost to you on building an agency like this, on building AI and making sure that you are in that conversation neck and neck.
Yeah, the financial costs are just the costs to
Yeah, just I mean the cost to, just the financial cost, the health cost, the, personal cost, just what it really takes for someone to do what you are doing and to create the tool, to create the business, to create the impact that you're having.
yeah. I would say from a financial standpoint, it has not been bad. I would say that but I will say, ever since DEI has become woke or, not a term that we are using anymore, corporations have changed. And we all know this. Corporations, everyone has changed their mindset. And what I did find out, though, is there are a lot of organizations that are still behind the scenes doing that good work. So, as the investor before who has eventually screwed me over said, how are you going to have an agency that's focused on social impact? And there's so many opportunities and people do want to do so much good work. So from that perspective, financial and which has evolved as time has gone on, but also from a fulfillment standpoint, some days it's like this work is just so amazing and we're making so much impact. And then it's like, oh my gosh, I'm not making any kind of impact. I'm worried about what's on the news. And I just had the cabinet meeting on right before this. Like you can watch it. It's just like, why do I listen to this stuff?
I have no desire to take antacids and peptides and Tums right now, so I will refuse to watch that.
To you. But I I mean, everything I went through, it has to have led to this moment. And I think all the moments ahead that are just going to be fulfilling and helpful. And hopefully, I just see that huge impact throughout my life. And I know that the health issues when, going through seizures, thought I had breast cancer, all these different things. And it's just like, okay, when is it gonna, not be all this craziness? And fortunately, it's been a year, like I mentioned, that since I've had a seizure, I did not have breast cancer. So that in some ways is like, good. I mean, it is really good, but I also have to, it's top of mind all the time,
Yeah.
and yeah, just making sure I'm on the right medication and I'm going to have to be on it the rest of my life. And I did have the opportunity in Boston for the top hospitals in the world. And so,
Sure.
um, finding solutions and what is possible was available in Boston. So there are things that I never forget that are always top of mind every single day, but I also know the end goal and the ongoing goal is to make that impact. And it's beyond me, it's beyond like my health or anything like that. It's who am I supporting and working with to achieve these goals of making the world a better place.
Yeah. And you're doing an incredible job with it. So,
Thank
Catherine, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for sharing your story, your voice, and the way that you are here to support these organizations. And I couldn't agree with you more that I think it's very easy to get caught up in the fear that media presents and the fears of what is happening with the administration and just this fight back on, DEI is a negative word, empathy is a sin, like all of these
you.
things. But at the same time, there are plenty. Like if there's an extreme amount of people here, there's also another group here. There's always the yin to the yang. And so, I think it's about where you're looking and how you're looking and not letting the fear really suppress the way that, our brains then function under threat and paying attention to those that are like, no, we're still going to do it. And yeah, there are plenty of organizations. They're not calling it DEI anymore, but they're still doing the work and they're just doing it under the radar. So thank you so much for doing what you're doing. Thank you so much for building together AI. Thank you so much for sharing why every organization, especially right now, needs to really take ownership over their perception, their voice, their messaging, and why it's so important for them to really utilize something like Together AI so that they're like battling the bias firsthand and not getting succumbed to what's there. So thank you so much. We're obviously going to have like all your links and everything of how people can get in touch with you underneath, but I just wanted to say thank you so much for being here. Definitely going to have you back on for sure. I think there's plenty
Awesome.
that's going to happen.
You so much for having me. There's just a little we, touched on. So there's so much more. So I'm looking forward to continuing our conversations. But
Yeah.
thank you so much. It was a pleasure being on your podcast. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks. If you're enjoying these episodes, I'd really love it if you could subscribe, leave a review, or share it with your friends and family. Your words help others discover that the stories and these episodes exist in the perspectives that we're exploring over here. And the more feedback we get from you through those reviews, the more we can make sure that we're creating meaningful episodes that you want to listen to. Thank you so much.